I think from a public relations point of view, it's a very dangerous period for Trump, and he's following his time-worn strategy of saying it's not true, fake news. He's been successful in many other circumstances where people thought it was just bluff and braggadocio. He's gotten away with it, so there's hardly room for optimism that this time he might get caught.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you.
Well, we'd have to start off with what's happened on Monday night. Of course, US lawmakers making Donald Trump's infamous letter to Jeffrey Epstein public for his 50th birthday in 2003. Now, I know that you've probably seen it, but just for our audience and listeners, it seems to be what has drawn a stick figure of what looks to be a woman's body. It has written on it, "We have certain things in common, Jeffrey," and then the one line reads, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." And this, of course, comes after Trump and his team have vehemently denied this drawing and this letter even existed. So, Ambassador, I just want your initial reaction to seeing this.
This is something the Wall Street Journal reported some time ago. Trump immediately sued them for libel, denying that he wrote the letter, drew the letter, signed the letter, knew anything about the letter. It's going to be interesting to see how he reacts later today and what the White House says. I'm sure they're going to say it's totally fake news. I mean, there is someone who actually knows the answer to the question whether Trump sent the letter, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, she was interviewed by the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, which is itself a extraordinary event. She's a federal prisoner, and he's the number 2 official in the Justice Department. I don't know. I don't recall whether the transcript of the interview, which they released, contained a question on the letter. But certainly, members of Congress are going to want to know what the answer is. But I think, true to form, Trump will simply deny that he had anything to do with it, and we'll see what happens from that.
The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, she claims the Wall Street Journal, as you said, is fake news. Leavitt, along with staunch Trump supporters, have said that that's not even his signature. But Ambassador, you've worked in his administration and you're privy to the way that PR nightmares can be spun. So is this just another attempt for Trump to shake it off? And I wonder if this strategy of deny, deny, deny has failed him.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how his MAGA base reacts to it. They have certainly taken his lead on a lot of things. He says something never happened, and they just accept it. But here, I think part of his trouble is that the MAGA base was responsible for keeping the Epstein scandal alive. During the Biden administration, they said it was an example of how people who are well-connected can avoid penalties for acts like the human trafficking that Epstein engaged in. So I think it's not so much a question of Trump versus his base as the base itself fragmenting along lines of people who have listened to the victims, Epstein's victims who have been in Washington recently, and really think there's something there to discuss. I don't fully understand why Trump has taken the position this is all fake, we ought to put this behind us, there's nothing there. If he had nothing to hide, I would think he'd want to be the first one to say, look, here's yes, I've said I knew Jeffrey Epstein. I also said I kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago at one point. Here's everything there is to know, and now let's move on. But he's not doing that. He's saying it's a fake scandal, fake news, and it doesn't want to disclose anymore. And that leads people who worry about transparency in government, who have been demanding transparency on Epstein, now to say, well, it's not just the Biden administration. Now the Trump administration doesn't want to make things public.
And Ambassador, despite the letter obviously being made public, it obviously doesn't incriminate Trump as being involved in anything nefarious, nor does it 100% confirm that he knew exactly what Epstein was involved in. But the letter being real, or we assume it is real, does contradict what Donald Trump has been claiming, what his administration has been saying. So I wonder if Americans, including these Republicans that you've mentioned, who are staunch supporters of all of the Epstein files being made public, are looking at Trump and considering him to be a liar.
Well, I think anytime you have an episode like this, it has to undercut Trump's credibility, because people may say, well, I believe what Trump says publicly. That's what they may say. But I think inside they know this is an episode where he's probably been caught in falsifying something that would have been easy just to say as the UK's ambassador to Washington, who also contributed a birthday letter, has said several times and repeated last night. I wish I'd never met Jeffrey Epstein. That's a pretty good response, I think, but that's not the response Trump is giving. And it's sometimes in politics, it's an accumulation of things, no one of which may be catastrophic, but which build up and put a politician in real trouble. We've got a huge debate coming up over the federal budget. Economic statistics coming out today in the next several weeks will show whether the economy maybe has finally begun to feel the negative effects of the tariffs. All of this really could add up and have an effect on Trump. But his base has been very loyal to him. And he once said over 10 years ago, I could go out in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody in cold blood and get away with it. So we'll see if that still holds.
One of the more interesting things that came out of this was, of course, House Speaker Mike Johnson. He claimed last Thursday that Trump was an FBI informant and he was trying to take this stuff down. But those comments are then walked back by his own team, who released a statement that read that the speaker is reiterating what the victim's attorney said, which is that Donald Trump, who kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, was the only one who more than a decade ago was willing to help prosecutors expose Epstein for being a disgusting child predator. Now, of course, what Johnson meant to say was that Trump was helpful in providing information and answering questions to those who were investigating Epstein in and around 2009 and not actually an FBI informant. But Ambassador, is this a normal thing for a member of Trump administration, especially the House Speaker, to be mixing up?
Well, it's quite a misunderstanding or misstatement if that's what he meant to say. I think most Republicans, at least today and maybe as far as they can the rest of the week, will just suddenly be unavailable to anybody. Yesterday, when they were asked about the letter, the drawing, and Trump's signature, the almost uniform response was, well, we haven't seen it yet, so we really don't know. Well, today it's on the front page of most American, the picture, the drawing is on the front page of most American newspapers, so it's going to be pretty hard to avoid it. So they may turn out to be very busy on the coming budget problem for the next several days.
Ambassador, you mentioned this lawsuit. Donald Trump, he sued a $10 billion lawsuit to the Wall Street Journal and to Rupert Murdoch. Where do you think this puts his lawsuit?
Well, it was never going to go anywhere, and I think now the only question is how quickly the Wall Street Journal can get it dismissed, and will they get attorney's fees awarded from Trump filing frivolous litigation?
How do you think Trump and the White House will recover from this? By the time your and I's interview will be published, Ambassador, Caroline Levitt would have faced a press briefing. She would have spoken to reporters. Of course, I imagine there will be question after question on this. But do you think Trump and his team have been backed into a corner and, so to speak, caught red-handed, I guess?
Yeah, I think this is pretty difficult to explain to most people in the country. And we don't know what other evidence is out there. We don't know what Ghislaine Maxwell would say. We don't know what documents she may have somewhere, or others who had the birthday book or had seen the birthday book or who talked to Trump about it at some point. So Trump's ability to say it's not true, I didn't do it, lasts until there's contrary evidence. And now there's contrary evidence and more may come out. Other people may come forward. So I think it's from a public relations point of view, it's a very dangerous period for Trump, and he's following his time-worn strategy of saying it's not true, fake news. He's been successful in many other circumstances where people thought it was just bluff and braggadocio. He's gotten away with it. So there's hardly room for optimism that this time he might get caught.
It should also be mentioned, Ambassador, that former President Bill Clinton's birthday letter was also made public after years of friendship that was very much documented. He wrote in the book in 2003, shortly before their friendship ended, he said, "It's reassuring, isn't it, to have lasted so long across all the years of learning and knowing adventures, and to also have your childlike curiosity, the drive to make a difference, and the solace of friends." I wonder, should Bill Clinton be receiving the same kind of public scrutiny the same way Trump is? Of course, he isn't the president currently, and he wrote this shortly after, I guess, finishing his presidency. So I wonder, should he still also receive the same kind of flack?
Well, I think everybody who had some association with Epstein has explaining to do, and maybe they've got good explanations. It's that could well be true with Trump, which just makes it all the harder to understand why he having himself talked about Epstein at various times, and certainly having many of the influencers who are now in his administration who raise these issues. Why he suddenly wants to shut the door on it. That's what causes disquiet within the MAGA base. Other people can understand why they're worried they might be embarrassed or something like that, but Trump says he has nothing to fear. So I think he's put himself in a difficult position, and it may be that whatever damage politically he will have suffered, that has already taken place, and there's nothing more to see. But it's going to be an interesting couple of days here in Washington. It's certainly much more interesting for press and public than budget numbers.
Absolutely. I want to move on to what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, Ambassador. This week, Trump will meet with EU leaders to discuss launching phase 2 of sanctions against Russia, or so as a reporter put it to Trump earlier last week. It's been over 3 weeks since the Alaska summit. We've had no headway with reaching an agreement or even getting Putin into a meeting room with Zelensky. So what do you think Trump and the EU leaders will need to decide on in an attempt to force Putin into a ceasefire?
You know, Putin has acted essentially as though he has a completely free hand since the Alaska summit. He has disdained any real conversation on a ceasefire. The Russian military activities continue. Indeed, they're expanding in terms of targeting of some of their drone attacks. There's talk about movements of new Russian forces near the Ukrainian border. And certainly the meeting in Beijing over the weekend with Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi of India, Kim Jong-un, and Vladimir Putin was a real sign that Putin's got friends who are going to have his back for continuing the war in Ukraine. I'm very worried that although Trump says he's prepared to put new sanctions on Russia, it's not at all clear what he means by that, how big the sanctions will be. I mean, honestly, part of the problem here with the sale of oil and gas from Russia to countries like China, India, Turkey, and others is that the EU and the UK and the US wrote sanctions that basically permitted to happen. And they did so because while they wanted to reduce sales of Russian oil, they didn't want to reduce it too much because they were afraid of restricting supply on international markets that would drive the price of gasoline at the pump higher in their domestic companies. So what a number of companies in India did in particular was buy Russian gas below the ceiling price set by EU and other sanctions, refine it a little bit, and then sell it at world market prices, including back to Europe. So, you know, you may not like it, and there are plenty of reasons not to like it, but they didn't actually do anything in violation of the sanctions the way they were written. I think when Trump imposed a 25% additional tariff on India, the only country that's been sanctioned, not Russia itself, not China, which has bought a lot more oil and gas, but just India, the sanction was too broad. If it's particular companies in India that are engaged in this purchase and resale, then look at what to do about them. But he's now, in effect, sanctioned the entire Indian economy and shredded years of effort by the United States and others to pull India away from Russia and alert it to the dangers of China. So what was intended to put pressure on Russia and Ukraine has backfired, in effect, in a pretty significant way.
So, Ambassador, when you were watching on Narendra Modi in China, you're watching on Vladimir Putin there, a lot of holding hands, a lot of cozying up between these, what we were calling the axis of upheaval plus India. Were you looking at the situation thinking that Trump and these sanctions had pushed Modi into the arms of Russia, into the arms of China?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt there's a huge negative impact on the U.S.-India bilateral relationship. That this is not the only thing that Trump has done that's caused it to go into a tailspin. I think ultimately it's correctable because India has to understand the difficulties that it still has with China. Nothing's changed there other than that at that meeting in Beijing, they were all irritated with the United States. The greater danger is that we've pushed them back toward Russia, and that India will now double down on purchasing Russian oil and gas. You know, when we put sanctions back on Iran in 2018 after withdrawing the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal, we worked with countries that had been purchasing Iranian oil because we knew that it would have a negative impact on them. And it was a subject of debate within the Trump administration, but basically we gave some countries waivers and helped them to find other sources of oil that maybe weren't quite as cheap as what they were buying from Iran, but at least got them through the transition period. We could have tried that with India to pull it away from this cheaper Russian oil and gas, but apparently nothing was done in that regard. So again, it's another example of real missed opportunity that I think cost us both in the Ukraine conflict, but in the broader struggle against the Russia-China axis, which I think is going to be our principal threat for the rest of the century.
Ambassador, meanwhile, what's happening in Russia, a situation that I think has gone quite unnoticed, I want to get your thoughts on it, is that the Russian government has mandated that all new phones have this messaging app installed and it's called Max. Now, this is a government messaging app that basically gives the Kremlin access to user data. It can isolate them from the rest of the internet. So far, around 30 million Russians have Max on their phones, and that will continue to grow. So you're someone, as you mentioned, that has been, I guess, recognizing the threat that is China. And I wonder, has Putin taken a leaf out of China's playbook in regards to controlling its citizens by forcing them to download this messaging app?
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of program. Who knows what else is in it besides being a messaging app, as a tracker to let the government know where you are at all times, to have, as you say, entry into your conversations, into everything that goes on over that phone. And that's just not something that's consistent with a free and open society like the Western democracies have. Obviously, that's not very attractive to Vladimir Putin and his advisors at the Kremlin. But it's something that really, the way the interconnectedness of all the telecommunications we have just makes it a lot easier for authoritarian governments to do this. And I'm sure that from the point of view of the Kremlin, this is going to provide them with a lot of information about what dissidents are saying inside Russia. It's something that it really strikes a chord as being right out of 1984.
Just a final question, Ambassador. The Federal Communications Commission has started revoking approval for certain Chinese testing labs to be used on U.S. electronics. So right now, around 75% of electronic devices used in the United States are actually tested in labs based in China before they're imported into the US. So the beginning of this revoke is because the FCC says that they're concerned over national security threats and Chinese influence on US tech. So this is quietly quite a big move for the FCC to move regulation testing out of China and into a safer space. We're not quite sure where they're going to move it, but I assume it would be somewhere cheaper than the US. So they've been doing this for the last 20 years, Ambassador. So what does that say to you that the government is looking at, that they're worried about the national security?
Well, it's another example, at least I'll just say in my case, of learning something that was completely new to me. I had no idea this was going on, but it's certainly very dangerous if all these tests are being done in China. We know that China has used companies like Huawei and ZTE as arms of Chinese intelligence. They're not just telecommunications companies, but all the devices manufactured in China, the devices tested in China, are all susceptible to abuse by the Chinese government. Look at TikTok. Trump still refusing to follow the statutory mandate that he either find an acceptable buyer for TikTok or close it down. He's still using it. He's a TikTok user himself, even though TikTok is another one of China's big vacuum cleaners to pull together information about its users. So, we are pretty aware now of what China's been up to for quite some period of time, but we're still unwilling as a society, and I'd say much the same is true in Europe, of really doing what is necessary. So I think the FCC move is a good step, but certainly there are many others we still need to take.
Ambassador, sorry, you mentioned TikTok. Do want to ask you, if you were still working as Trump's national security advisor, would you be advising him right now to be shutting down TikTok in the US or finding a US company? Would you be arguing that he has to make this a priority?
Absolutely. I would shut it down. I don't think we know enough about what TikTok's capabilities are. This has nothing to do with freedom of expression. This is not trying to suppress content on TikTok. It has nothing to do with what you see on TikTok. It's what TikTok is saying about you that should concern people. I would have shut it down long ago.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Well, glad to be with you again.